Lucille O'Neal expected a normal first-class flight, a quiet journey, a comfortable seat, nothing out of the ordinary. But from the moment she boarded, something felt off. The hesitant glances, the whispered doubts, the subtle but undeniable message, "You don't belong here." What started as quiet discomfort soon escalated into public humiliation at 35,000 feet. But what no one on that flight realized was that Lucille O'Neal wasn't just any passenger. She was the mother of a legend. And when the world found out what happened, the airline would face a reckoning like never before. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us, where are you watching from? Share in the comments below. Lucille O'Neal walked through the airport with the quiet confidence of a woman who had seen the world but remained humble. Her presence was warm, yet commanding. Dressed in an elegant navy blue pantsuit with a pearl necklace resting lightly at her collarbone, she exuded grace. She had always believed in treating people with kindness, no matter who they were. But experience had taught her that kindness was not always reciprocated. As she reached the first-class boarding gate, she could already feel a few sets of eyes on her. Some were merely curious glances, others carried something else, something she had learned to recognize over the years. The unspoken question that came with every look, does she really belong here? A flight attendant, a young woman with blonde hair neatly tied into a bun, checked Lucille's boarding pass. Her name tag read, Charlotte West. She gave a fleeting smile, but there was hesitation in her movements, as if she needed a second to process what she was seeing. She glanced down at the pass, then back at Lucille. "First class, ma'am?" Charlotte asked, her voice polite but uncertain. Lucille nodded. "That's what the ticket says, sweetheart." Charlotte forced another smile, nodded, and gestured for her to proceed, but Lucille could already sense it. The tiny pause, the double check, the subtle flicker of doubt. As she stepped onto the plane, Lucille let out a quiet sigh. "Here we go again." Lucille found her seat, 2A, a spacious leather recliner with a perfect view of the cabin. She settled in, placing her purse neatly by her feet. The flight crew moved about, preparing for takeoff. Across the aisle, a sharply dressed businessman adjusted his cufflinks. He had salt and pepper hair, an expensive watch, and the air of someone who believed the world revolved around him. His name, she would later learn, was Richard Coleman. He barely glanced at her at first. But then, as if something had caught his attention, he turned his head slightly, looking her up and down. His expression was unreadable, but the flicker of irritation in his eyes was hard to miss. Lucille was used to this. It was the same look she had seen in country clubs, high-end restaurants, and luxury hotels. The look that questioned why she was in their space. The plane continued boarding, and first class filled up. A young couple in designer outfits, a tech entrepreneur typing furiously on his laptop, an older woman in a fur coat sipping champagne. The cabin had a quiet exclusivity to it. Whispers, the occasional clink of glasses, the rustle of newspapers. Charlotte returned, offering pre-flight drinks. When she reached Lucille, her smile was a little tighter. "Would you like a drink before takeoff, ma'am?" Lucille nodded. "Just some water, please." As Charlotte poured the water, Richard let out a small chuckle. It was low, but audible. Lucille glanced in his direction. He wasn't looking at her, but the smirk on his face was unmistakable. She had dealt with men like him before, men who thought money gave them power over people. She ignored him, taking a slow sip of her water, but the feeling of unease settled deeper in her chest. As the plane taxied down the runway, Lucille closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the steady hum of the engines. The takeoff was smooth, and soon they were thousands of feet in the air, cruising through the sky. A few minutes later, Charlotte returned with a notepad, checking on the first-class passengers. When she reached Lucille's seat, she hesitated again. "Mrs. O'Neal, could I see your boarding pass once more?" Lucille arched an eyebrow. "Is there a problem?" Charlotte's smile faltered. "Oh no, no problem at all. Just a quick verification." Lucille reached into her purse and handed over the pass. Charlotte studied it carefully, then gave a quick nod, returning it. "Thank you, ma'am." As Charlotte walked away, Lucille caught Richard watching the exchange. He shook his head slightly, a smug smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Lucille exhaled slowly, keeping her composure. She wasn't about to let this ruin her flight. But something told her. This wasn't over. About 20 minutes into the flight, the cabin doors to economy and business class opened as a different flight attendant stepped in. She whispered something to Charlotte, who immediately turned her head toward Lucille. Their eyes met, and Charlotte's expression shifted. Something uncertain flickered across her face. Lucille straightened in her seat. Charlotte approached again, this time with a carefully measured expression. "Mrs. O'Neal," she began, her voice overly formal. "I'm so sorry, but it seems there was an issue with your ticket." Lucille frowned. "An issue?" "Yes, ma'am. There appears to have been a mix-up. Your seat was incorrectly assigned. You were actually booked in economy." A sharp silence fell between them. Richard let out another quiet chuckle, shaking his head. Lucille's grip tightened on the armrest. "That can't be right. I booked this seat myself." Charlotte's polite mask remained. "I understand, ma'am, and I truly apologize for the inconvenience. If you'd like, we can assist you in moving to your correct seat now." Lucille felt her stomach tighten. The murmurs around her, the subtle glances from the other passengers. It was happening. She took a deep breath. "I'd like to speak to the captain." Charlotte's smile remained frozen. "Ma'am, the captain is occupied at the moment, but I assure you, I'd still like to speak to him." A slight pause. Charlotte hesitated, then nodded. "I'll see what I can do." As she walked away, Lucille glanced across the aisle. Richard met her gaze and smirked. "Some mistakes are bound to happen," he murmured, turning back to his newspaper. Lucille's heart pounded, but she remained calm. She had been raised to handle situations like this with grace. But inside, she knew. This was not a mistake. This was something else. And it was only the beginning. Lucille O'Neal adjusted her seat, trying to relax, but something about the exchange with the flight attendant left her unsettled. The subtle pauses, the hesitant tone, the unnecessary double-checking of her ticket. It was all too familiar. She had lived long enough to recognize when she was being tested, when people were looking for an excuse to tell her she didn't belong. The cabin was quiet except for the occasional clink of glasses and the soft hum of the engines. She glanced at her watch. It was still a long flight ahead. She sighed and reached for the in-flight magazine, flipping through the pages absent-mindedly. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw Charlotte West returning, this time with another crew member. Paul Simmons, a senior attendant with slicked-back hair and a stiff posture. Lucille knew before they even spoke that something was wrong. "Mrs. O'Neal," Charlotte started, her voice artificially sweet. "I'm really sorry to bother you again, but we've come across a slight issue regarding your seat assignment." Lucille lowered the magazine slowly. "Issue?" "Yes, ma'am." Paul took over, his tone professional but firm. "It seems there was a mix-up with your booking. This seat was inadvertently assigned to you, but it actually belongs to another passenger." Lucille narrowed her eyes. "I booked this ticket personally, first class." Directly from the airline, Paul offered a practiced, tight-lipped smile. "Yes, and we absolutely understand how frustrating this must be. But after reviewing our records, it looks like you were actually meant to be seated in economy." Lucille's chest tightened. From across the aisle, she heard a quiet scoff. She turned her head just slightly and caught Richard Coleman watching the scene unfold with a smug expression. He wasn't even pretending to hide his amusement. A woman in the row behind him, Victoria Langley, a middle-aged blonde in a pearl necklace, leaned forward slightly, whispering something to her companion. Then, with a subtle shake of her head, she muttered, just loud enough for Lucille to hear, "Well, that makes more sense." Lucille inhaled deeply, keeping her composure. "This seat is mine," she said, her voice unwavering. "I completely understand, ma'am," Paul replied, his tone becoming slightly firmer. "But unfortunately, we have to correct this mistake now." Lucille set her jaw. "No." Paul blinked, momentarily thrown off by her direct refusal. Charlotte shifted uncomfortably. A few passengers were now listening in, their eyes flicking between Lucille and the crew. Paul's polite facade began to crack. His voice lowered just slightly. "Ma'am, I don't want to cause a scene. Lucille met his gaze. Then don't. Silence stretched between them. Charlotte cleared her throat. Mrs. O'Neal, the captain has been notified about the situation, and he's asked us to handle this quietly. Lucille's fingers curled slightly on the armrest. So that was their plan. Make it look like a simple mix-up, pressure her into moving, and hope no one would care enough to question it. She had two choices: comply and let them strip away her dignity under the guise of a mistake, or stand her ground and force them to show their true intentions. She chose the latter. I'm not moving, she said, her voice even. Charlotte inhaled sharply, glancing at Paul, who was beginning to look frustrated. Paul bent down slightly, lowering his voice as if speaking to a child. Mrs. O'Neal, I assure you this is just an unfortunate misunderstanding. If you'll just cooperate, we can get this resolved smoothly. Lucille tilted her head slightly. Tell me something, Mr. Simmons. When was the last time you accidentally reassigned a first-class seat from a wealthy white businessman to economy? Paul's lips pressed into a thin line. Charlotte stiffened. Ma'am, that is absolutely not what's happening here. Richard Coleman let out a low chuckle. Oh, come on, he muttered under his breath. Some people just love playing the victim. Lucille turned her head slowly toward him, eyes sharp as glass. Excuse me? She said, her voice dangerously calm. Richard smirked. I said, some people love playing the victim. You made a mistake booking your ticket, that's all. But now it has to turn into some kind of drama. He shook his head. Typical. A murmur spread through the first-class cabin. A few passengers turned away, pretending not to hear. Others, like Victoria Langley, nodded in silent agreement with Richard. Lucille stared at him for a long moment. She had met men like him all her life, men who believed the world was built for them, and people like her were just lucky to exist in it. She took a slow breath, then looked back at Paul. I want to speak to the captain. Paul exhaled sharply. Ma'am, as I said, the captain is aware of the situation. Lucille didn't blink. Then he can come tell me himself. A tense pause. Paul hesitated. He glanced at Charlotte, who was shifting awkwardly. Clearly, this was not going as smoothly as they had hoped. Then, without another word, Paul straightened and walked toward the cockpit. Minutes passed. The first-class cabin remained thick with tension. Richard had gone back to reading his newspaper, though a smirk still played at the corner of his mouth. Victoria sipped her champagne delicately, stealing occasional glances toward Lucille. Lucille sat tall, her face unreadable. Inside, her heart was pounding, but she had learned long ago that fear and dignity could not exist in the same space. She would not let them see anything but steel. Finally, Paul returned, alone. He folded his hands in front of him. The captain has given us clearance to proceed. Mrs. O'Neal, you need to move to economy. Lucille's stomach dropped. She had expected the captain to step in, to at least offer some level of authority beyond the flight attendants. But he hadn't even come out of the cockpit. He had dismissed her outright. Handle it quietly. She felt the weight of every set of eyes on her, waiting to see what she would do. Would she resist? Would she make a scene? Slowly, Lucille reached for her purse, her movements deliberate. She stood, holding her chin high. If they were going to strip her of her dignity, they would not get the satisfaction of seeing her break. As she stepped into the aisle, a ripple of reactions moved through the cabin. Richard looked satisfied, as if he had just won some silent victory. Victoria sighed, murmuring, well, that's settled. Lucille felt her chest tighten as she walked forward, past the rows of luxurious first-class seats, past the passengers who refused to meet her gaze. The curtains to business class parted. The walk felt longer than it should have. Every step an insult, every glance a reminder. As she reached economy, she heard someone whisper, "That's Shaquille O'Neal's mother." Another voice, low but sharp. "No way." A young man, Jordan Wells, a musician with tired eyes and a guitar case wedged under his seat, looked up as Lucille was led past. His brow furrowed, and he pulled out his phone, tapping the screen quickly. Lucille reached her assigned seat, far smaller, far less comfortable than the one she had left behind. She sat down gracefully, though her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her pants. The flight attendants disappeared back into first class, the curtain swishing shut behind them, as if sealing away the truth. Jordan glanced at her, hesitant. Then, after a moment, he turned back to his phone, his fingers moving swiftly. Lucille exhaled, staring straight ahead. She had endured worse. But this time, something felt different. She just didn't know it yet. Lucille O'Neal sat still, her hands resting lightly on her lap, her breath steady. But inside, she felt the heat of 100 silent judgments pressing down on her. Paul Simmons, the senior flight attendant, had returned with Charlotte West, standing just inches from her seat, waiting for her to comply. Paul's professional smile had vanished, replaced with something colder, impatience laced with a hint of discomfort. He didn't like this situation any more than she did. But unlike her, he had the power to end it. Lucille slowly unbuckled her seatbelt. The sound of the clasp clicking open seemed louder than it should have been. The weight of every first-class passenger's gaze was on her. For a moment, she considered making one last argument, forcing them to say out loud what they were really doing. But what would that accomplish? They had already decided. The captain had decided. She inhaled deeply, lifted her chin, and stood. A thick, tense silence hung in the air. Charlotte gestured toward the aisle, but as Lucille stepped forward, she felt it, the subtle, firm grip on her elbow. It wasn't forceful, not enough to bruise, but enough to say, keep walking, enough to strip away whatever dignity she had left. Lucille didn't resist. She walked, and they all watched. Richard Coleman smirked behind his newspaper, his satisfaction barely concealed. Victoria Langley pursed her lips as if this was all terribly unfortunate, but somehow necessary. The other passengers avoided eye contact, looking anywhere but at the elegant woman being escorted out of first class, like an imposter, caught at a private event. As she moved past the seats, whispers rippled through the cabin like a low current of electricity. Some were barely audible, others not even attempting subtlety. Should have known there was a mistake. Wonder how she got the ticket in the first place. Some people always try to play the victim. Lucille ignored them all. But humiliation was an insidious thing. It didn't require words. It didn't need force. It seeped into the air, into the way people averted their eyes, into the way silence weighed heavier than words. She passed by a middle-aged couple in the last row of first class. The woman, a brunette in a crisp white blazer, watched with something resembling guilt in her eyes. She opened her mouth slightly, then hesitated. Her fingers curled around the stem of her wine glass. She said nothing. Not a single person spoke up. Lucille had been alone in rooms before, but never like this. The curtain to business class swished open, and suddenly, the luxury of first class faded behind her. The seats were still comfortable, still expensive, but the energy was different. Business class passengers worked on laptops, flipped through reports, or sipped their drinks. Few even looked up as she passed. Few, but not all. A man in his 50s, wearing a navy suit, glanced up from his phone, frowning slightly. Recognition flickered across his face. Lucille caught it. He knew her, not personally, but he knew who she was. He narrowed his eyes as if trying to place where he'd seen her before. And then, just as quickly as recognition came, so did hesitation. She saw it happen in real time. The moment he realized what was happening, the way his lips parted like he might say something, the way his posture stiffened as if debating whether to intervene. Then he glanced at Paul Simmons, at Charlotte, at the other passengers watching silently. His mouth closed, and he looked away. Lucille's chest tightened. Not because she had expected help. She had learned a long time ago that expecting people to speak up was a fool's hope. But it still hurt, knowing someone saw exactly what was happening and still chose silence. The curtain to economy came into view. The transition from business class to coach was always stark. The aisles tighter, the air more crowded, the sense of exclusivity gone. Paul let go of her arm the moment they crossed over, as if letting her go at that point would somehow erase the image of him escorting her out. Lucille held her posture, refusing to let her shoulders sink, refusing to let herself shrink. But inside, her humiliation burned. She had spent decades ensuring her son understood dignity. That no matter his fame, no matter his fortune, his worth was not defined by the seats he sat in or the people who judged him. But now, she was being taught that lesson in real time. Paul pointed toward her new seat, 3 rows back, against the window. "This is your new seat, ma'am," he said, the professional lilt back in his voice, as if this was nothing more than a routine correction. Lucille said nothing. She slid into the cramped seat, the leather cold against her back. Paul hesitated for a moment, as if expecting her to lash out, to make a scene, to yell. When she didn't, he gave a quick nod and turned, disappearing back into business class. The curtain swished shut. Lucille exhaled, staring ahead. The humiliation was done. Or so she thought. She wasn't alone in the row. A young man sat in the aisle seat, hoodie pulled over his head, fingers tapping against his phone screen. Jordan Wells. He had barely looked up when she arrived, but now, something about the energy in the row had changed. Lucille wasn't sure if he had seen everything or just caught the tail end, but either way, he was looking at her now, and frowning. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, his voice low. "Did they just move you from first class?" Lucille adjusted the strap of her purse, not meeting his gaze. "Something like that." Jordan studied her. He wasn't a businessman. He wasn't a wealthy executive or a frequent flyer with platinum status. He looked like someone who had taken this flight with every penny he had. A musician, perhaps, or an artist. Someone who had been on the receiving end of unfairness before. He hesitated, glancing toward the curtain that now separated them from the luxury she had been stripped of. Then, he glanced back at her. His brow furrowed slightly. "You look familiar," he said slowly. Lucille finally turned to meet his eyes. Recognition flickered, then widened. Jordan sat up straight. "No way," he breathed. His voice dropped to a hushed, almost reverent whisper. "You're Shaquille O'Neal's mother." Lucille's lips pressed into a thin line. Jordan exhaled sharply, glancing around the cabin, then back at her. His eyes were no longer just surprised, they were outraged. "They moved Shaq's mom to economy?" he muttered under his breath. Nah, that's crazy." Lucille gave him a small, tired smile. "It happens, son." Jordan shook his head, his fingers already moving across his phone screen. Lucille frowned slightly. "What are you doing?" Jordan didn't look up. "Making sure it doesn't just happen, ma'am." Lucille glanced down. She caught the blue glow of a social media app, the flashing red "Live" icon. Jordan lifted the phone slightly, angling it toward himself. His voice was low but steady. "I'm on this flight right now," he said, his voice edged with disbelief and quiet anger. "And I just watched this airline pull one of the worst things I've ever seen. They forcibly moved a black woman out of first class, Shaquille O'Neal's own mother, because they accidentally assigned her seat to someone else." Lucille inhaled sharply. Passengers around them started turning their heads. Some watched Jordan, while others shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to hear. Jordan continued. "This ain't just a mistake. This is what happens when people think no one's gonna say something. Well, I'm saying something." Lucille's heart pounded. And for the first time since this nightmare started, she felt something shift. Something bigger than humiliation. Something louder than silence. Jordan's post was about to change everything. Jordan Wells's hands were steady as he held up his phone, the screen glowing faintly in the dim cabin lights. His heart pounded in his chest, but his voice was controlled, deliberate. He wasn't just recording a moment, he was exposing an injustice in real time. "Y'all, I need you to listen to me," he spoke into the camera, his voice low but clear. "I'm on a flight right now, and something just happened that I can't let slide." He angled the phone slightly, careful not to be obvious, but still capturing the scene behind him. The camera's frame showed the plush, oversized seats of first class, separated by the curtain that had been shut moments ago to keep the truth hidden. And then, it panned to Lucille O'Neal, her posture dignified despite the humiliation she had just endured. "This woman right here," Jordan continued, his tone edged with disbelief and quiet outrage. "She was just forced out of first class. Not because of an actual mistake, not because she did anything wrong, but because some people, decided she didn't belong." Lucille, who had been staring straight ahead, slowly turned her head. Their eyes met. "Son, put that away," she murmured, her voice firm but not unkind. Jordan hesitated. He could hear the exhaustion in her tone, the weight of someone who had fought too many battles to count, but he couldn't ignore what he had just witnessed. "Ma'am, if I don't say something, they get away with it," he whispered back. Lucille sighed but didn't argue. Jordan turned the camera back to himself. "I need y'all to share this," he said. "This ain't just about one flight. It's about all the ways people like us are told we don't belong." And with that, he hit upload. Within seconds, the video was live. A few rows ahead, Charlotte West adjusted her scarf and took a deep breath. The tension from earlier hadn't settled yet. If anything, it had thickened, hanging in the air like a storm cloud. She had been doing this job long enough to know when a situation wasn't going away quietly. Her suspicions were confirmed when she caught a glimpse of movement in row 17. She turned her head slightly. Jordan Wells was holding up his phone. Her stomach dropped. Charlotte's eyes darted to Paul Simmons, who was busy speaking with another flight attendant. For a moment, she hesitated, then made a snap decision. Steeling herself, she smoothed her skirt and strode down the aisle. Jordan had barely finished checking his notifications when a shadow fell over him. "Sir." His head snapped up. Charlotte stood over him, her expression carefully controlled but her eyes sharp. "You need to put your phone away," she said, her voice polite but firm. Jordan tilted his head. "Why?" She forced a smile. "It's against airline policy to record other passengers without their consent." Jordan let out a dry laugh. "That's funny, 'cause I don't remember signing a consent form for y'all to humiliate this woman in front of the whole plane." Charlotte's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of unease crossed her face. She hadn't expected pushback. Lucille turned to Jordan and shook her head slightly, a silent plea to let it go. But Jordan wasn't about to let it go. "What's the real problem?" he asked, looking Charlotte straight in the eyes. "That I recorded it? Or that people are going to see it?" Passengers nearby began paying attention. A man across the aisle lowered his newspaper. A woman wearing headphones slowly slid them off. Charlotte noticed, too. She lowered her voice. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to delete the video." Jordan leaned back in his seat. "Nah." Charlotte's jaw clenched. "Sir, is there a problem here?" The voice didn't belong to Jordan or Charlotte. It belonged to a new passenger. A man in his early 40s dressed in a tailored navy blazer, watching the interaction with a keen, unimpressed expression. Charlotte hesitated. "No, sir. I was just—" The man raised an eyebrow. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to make sure a video never sees the light of day." Charlotte's face paled. And then, before she could say another word, a ding echoed through the cabin. Passengers reached for their phones. And then the whispers started. "Wait. Is this live? Oh my God. This is blowing up. Is this our flight?" Charlotte's chest tightened. She turned sharply back to Jordan, who was now watching her with a knowing smirk. "It's too late," he murmured. Charlotte's stomach sank. Miles away, in a sprawling mansion in Georgia, Shaquille O'Neal sat in his home theater, flipping through channels absent-mindedly. The room was dimly lit, the massive screen casting a soft glow over the leather seats. He had been half watching a basketball game, half scrolling through his phone. Then his screen buzzed. One new message. He almost ignored it, assuming it was one of his brothers or friends. But then he saw the name. Lucille O'Neal. His mother. Shaq sat up a little straighter, unlocking his phone with a quick swipe. The message was short. Just one word. Hurt. Shaq's grip tightened on the phone. His heart slammed against his ribs. His mother never sent messages like that. Never. Without hesitation, he hit the call button. The phone rang. Once, twice. Then, a robotic voice. "The number you are trying to reach is currently unavailable." Shaq frowned. He tried again. Same result. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Back on the plane, Lucille sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, staring out the window at the endless stretch of sky. Her mind was calm, but she could feel it. The shift, the quiet unraveling of the flight's perfect order. Jordan was still beside her, his phone buzzing nonstop with notifications. He glanced at her, lowering his voice. "This is blowing up, ma'am. People are already tagging the airline, tagging the CEO," Lucille exhaled. She didn't know whether to be relieved or exhausted. Across the aisle, a woman leaned in slightly. "Excuse me. I just saw the video. That was you?" Lucille turned to her. The woman hesitated. That wasn't right, what they did." Lucille gave her a knowing smile. "I know, sweetheart." The woman nodded slowly. Then she pulled out her phone. Another passenger did the same. And another. Within minutes, the entire cabin was awake, phones glowing, fingers scrolling, eyes widening as the story unfolded before them. Charlotte saw it too. She rushed back toward Paul Simmons, her voice urgent. "We have a problem." Paul glanced up from his paperwork, frowning. "What now?" Charlotte swallowed hard. "It's all over social media. Everyone is talking about it." Paul's face blanched. And then, another ding came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." Lucille closed her eyes. She had a feeling this flight was about to get a lot more interesting. Shaquille O'Neal paced across his massive living room, phone clutched in his hand, his jaw clenched. His mother's message, just one word, hurt, kept flashing in his mind like a warning siren. Something was wrong. He had tried calling twice, but it went straight to voicemail. That wasn't like her. Lucille O'Neal always answered her son's calls. He was about to call again when another buzz lit up his screen. This time it wasn't a text, it was a notification. Then another. And another. Shaq frowned, swiping down. Hundreds of mentions. His name tagged repeatedly. Then a trending hashtag, #respect Lucille O'Neal. His chest tightened. What the hell was going on? He tapped on the first post he saw, a video from an account called @JWellsMusic. It had already gained over 300,000 views in the last 20 minutes. As he pressed play, Jordan Wells's face appeared, eyes burning with frustration. "I need y'all to hear me. I'm on a flight right now, and something just happened that ain't sitting right with me. They just forced this woman, Shaquille O'Neal's mother, out of first class like she didn't belong there, humiliated her in front of the whole plane. And when I started recording, they tried to shut me down, but it's too late. The world needs to see this." The camera shifted, zooming in on Lucille O'Neal. Shaq's entire body went still. His mother sat quietly in an economy seat, hands folded in her lap, her posture straight despite the obvious humiliation she had been put through. He barely heard the rest of the video. Rage boiled in his blood, a slow burn turning into a wildfire. He turned, grabbed his keys, and headed straight for his car. On the plane, the air had changed. Passengers whispered in hushed tones. Screens glowed in the dimly lit cabin as more and more people realized what was happening in real time. The hashtag had started gaining traction fast. Charlotte West, the flight attendant who had forced Lucille out of first class, felt her stomach twist when she saw a passenger holding up their phone, her own face visible in the viral video. She turned sharply toward Paul Simmons, who was already checking his tablet, scrolling furiously. "This is getting bad," Charlotte whispered, leaning toward him. Paul barely glanced up, his fingers tapping fast. "I see it." A ding came from his tablet, a priority message from the airline's corporate office. CEO tagged, major media outlets notified, PR team activated. Paul's face went pale. Then another message popped up. "Why am I seeing our flight crew trending on social media for discrimination? Executive Vice President, Customer Relations." Charlotte inhaled sharply. "They're going to know it was us." Paul snapped his head up. "They already do." Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Russell Green sipped his coffee, glancing at the navigation screen. It had been an uneventful flight so far. A smooth takeoff, clear skies ahead. Then, his radio crackled. "Captain Green, this is ground control. Do you copy?" Russell straightened. "Copy. What's up?" A pause. "We've just received a direct inquiry from the airline's headquarters." Russell frowned. "About what?" "About an incident involving a first-class passenger being removed from their seat." Russell blinked. "First-class passenger?" He swiveled in his chair. I wasn't notified about any. And then it hit him. He turned toward the co-pilot. Did one of the flight attendants file a report? The co-pilot looked confused. Not that I know of. Russell's stomach dropped. If corporate knew about something before the pilot did, that meant one thing. This wasn't staying on the plane. Ground control, Russell said, clearing his throat. I'll get back to you. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. He had a feeling things were about to spiral. Back on the ground, Shaq sat in his parked car, dialing the airline's customer service number. A robotic voice greeted him. Thank you for calling Elite Sky Airlines. Your call is important to us. Please hold while we connect you to an agent. Shaq let out a sharp breath. His patience was running on fumes. A moment later, a woman's voice came through the line. Thank you for calling Elite Sky Airlines. My name is Angela. How can I assist you today? Shaq didn't waste time. I need to speak to a supervisor. Angela hesitated. Sir, I'd be happy to help. May I know what this is regarding? My mother, Shaq said, his voice steady but firm. Lucille O'Neal. She's on one of your flights right now and something happened. I need answers. Now. Angela still didn't recognize him. Sir, for security reasons, I can't disclose passenger information. But if your mother needs assistance, she can. She doesn't have her damn phone on. I understand that, sir, but. No, you don't, Shaq said, voice edged with quiet fury. You don't understand at all. Someone on your flight humiliated my mother, dragged her out of first class, and put her in economy. I have a video of it. The world has a video of it. And if you don't get me a supervisor in the next 10 seconds, I promise you. A click. A new voice replaced Angela's. This is James Thompson, Customer Service Manager. How can I assist? Shaq took a breath, steadying himself. Your airline made a mistake, a big one. I need to know exactly what happened, and I need to know now. There was a pause. Then, we're aware of the situation, Mr. O'Neal. On the plane, the walls were closing in. Paul Simmons and Charlotte West had retreated to the galley, their voices hushed but frantic. Charlotte's hands shook as she scrolled through her phone. The airline stock is already dropping. Do you know how bad this is going to get? Paul rubbed a hand over his face. They're going to throw us under the bus. You think they won't fire us? Charlotte hissed. Paul exhaled. I think the moment we land, we're screwed. Then, another ding came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Russell Green. It has come to my attention that there has been an incident on board involving one of our passengers. I want to assure everyone that we are handling the matter with the utmost seriousness. Paul and Charlotte froze. Russell's voice continued. We appreciate your patience, and I ask that we all remain respectful for the remainder of the flight. Click. The intercom went silent. Charlotte's pulse pounded. The captain never made announcements like that unless the airline told him to. That meant they were officially in crisis mode, and the landing wasn't going to be smooth. Miles below, Shaq's phone buzzed again. A new message. From a number he didn't recognize. But the name attached made his jaw tighten. Elite Sky Airlines, corporate office. Shaq stared at the screen. Then he opened the message. Mr. O'Neal, we are aware of the situation involving your mother. We are currently investigating. Please give us time to resolve this matter before making any public statements. Shaq let out a slow breath. He looked at the TV in his home theater. The news channel was already talking about it. Too late. This wasn't just an airline issue anymore. This was national news. And Shaquille O'Neal was about to make sure everyone paid attention. Charlotte West stood frozen in the galley, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. Her stomach churned. The whispering around her had started as a low murmur among the flight crew, but now it was growing, shifting into something heavier. The reality was sinking in. This wasn't just a small issue anymore. This was a career-ending disaster. Paul Simmons, still gripping his tablet, let out a slow breath. His usually sharp expression had dulled, his face pale. They're talking about us, he muttered. On every major network. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, it's everywhere. Charlotte swallowed hard, glancing around. The other flight attendants avoided her gaze. No one wanted to be associated with the mistake that had just gone viral. She turned toward the aisle, peering through the curtain into economy class. The passengers weren't just watching anymore, they were waiting. She knew that look. They were waiting for someone to make this right, and there was only one person on this flight with the authority to do it. In the cockpit, Captain Russell Green sat with his fingers steepled together. He had been flying for nearly 20 years, had dealt with emergency landings, technical failures, passenger disputes, but never this. The airline's corporate office had sent an urgent message. Resolve this before landing. Full discretion. Make this right. Russell exhaled sharply. He understood what that meant. It meant he had to fix it. He unbuckled his seatbelt, stood up, and adjusted his uniform. The sweat at the back of his neck was making his collar itch. Then, without a word, he walked out of the cockpit and toward the back of the plane. Lucille O'Neal sat quietly, staring out the window. The glow of the setting sun cast a soft orange light over the wing. She could feel the eyes on her. She could hear the murmurs. The people around her had seen the video, had pieced together what had happened, but no one had said a word to her directly. And that was fine. She wasn't interested in their guilt-ridden sympathy. What had happened had already happened. The only thing left was what they would do next. A shadow fell over her seat. Lucille turned. Standing in the aisle, adjusting his uniform, was Captain Russell Green. His face was tight with unease, and there was a thin sheen of sweat at his temple. The hush that fell over the cabin was immediate. Everyone was listening. Lucille said nothing. She simply waited. The captain cleared his throat, his voice quieter than she expected. Mrs. O'Neal. Lucille met his gaze, expression unreadable. Russell hesitated, then took a deep breath. I need to start by saying I'm sorry. What happened to you was unacceptable. Lucille arched an eyebrow. Unacceptable? Russell's throat bobbed. He could feel the weight of the cabin pressing down on him. He wasn't just apologizing to her, he was apologizing to everyone paying attention. He straightened. I take full responsibility. My crew failed you today. I failed you today. Lucille tilted her head slightly. She could see the struggle in his face, the way he wrestled between corporate damage control and actual regret. And still, she said nothing. Russell cleared his throat again. We would like to offer you your original seat back in first class, along with our sincerest apologies. Lucille's lips pressed into a thin line. She let the words hang in the air for a moment, absorbing them, letting them sink in. Then, she exhaled. Slowly, deliberately, she folded her hands in her lap and leaned forward slightly. And in the calmest voice, she spoke. You only respect me because of who my son is, not because of who I am. The entire plane fell silent. Russell's breath caught. Charlotte, watching from a distance, felt her stomach drop. Lucille didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words landed like a stone sinking into deep water. Heavy, undeniable, irreversible. I wasn't a VIP when I walked onto this plane, she continued, voice unwavering. I was just an older black woman sitting in first class, and that was enough for you to assume I didn't belong. Russell opened his mouth, but no words came. Lucille studied his expression. He looked like he wanted to argue, to explain, but he had nothing. Because she was right. She turned toward Charlotte, then Paul. You didn't see a mother. A grandmother. A woman who raised a family with dignity and grace. You saw an inconvenience. Paul shifted uncomfortably, sweat forming at his brow. Charlotte, for the first time, looked truly shaken. Lucille leaned back in her seat, folding her arms. You can keep your first-class seat. The weight of her refusal rippled through the plane. Passengers exchanged looks, some awkward, some ashamed. Even those who had stayed silent before couldn't ignore the gravity of the moment. Paul swallowed hard. Mrs. O'Neal, please. Lucille raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. No. Russell exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He had come back here expecting anger, expecting an outburst. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected to feel this small. After a long pause, he nodded slowly. I understand. Lucille gave him a knowing look. I hope you do. Russell straightened, gave a small nod, and turned back toward first class, his steps heavier than before. Charlotte and Paul remained, standing awkwardly, their presence now unwelcome. After a moment, they turned and left, disappearing behind the curtain. The cabin remained silent. Passengers looked at Lucille, some with admiration, some with guilt, some with a new understanding they hadn't had before. But no one questioned her anymore. She belonged here. Not because of who her son was, but because of who she was. As the plane neared its destination, phones buzzed. The story had already made headlines. CNN, FOX, the New York Times. Every major outlet. Jordan Wells refreshed his screen, shaking his head in disbelief. "Ma'am," he muttered, turning to Lucille. "This is going to be huge." Lucille sighed, turning back toward the window. "It already is." In Atlanta, Shaquille O'Neal stepped onto the tarmac, his phone still blowing up with messages. His private jet had landed just moments before his mother's commercial flight was scheduled to arrive. His heart still burned with frustration. But more than that, he was proud. Lucille had handled this the way she handled everything in life. With dignity, with grace, with a strength no one could take from her. He stood at the arrival gate, arms crossed, waiting. The world was watching. And the people responsible for this? They would never forget her name again. Lucille O'Neal sat in economy, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't look around, didn't acknowledge the whispers. Dignified, composed. But the pain was there, just beneath the surface. Next to her, Jordan Wells refreshed his phone, shaking his head as the view count climbed past 1,000,000. At the front of the plane, flight attendants stood stiffly, their faces pale. Charlotte West swallowed hard, gripping the edge of a seat. She had made a mistake. No, a disaster. The airline had been tagged in thousands of posts, their reputation unraveling in real time. The seatbelt light flicked off. A moment later, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, forced and strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles. On behalf of our crew, we apologize for any inconvenience during this flight. We appreciate your business and hope to serve you again." A weak attempt at damage control. It fooled no one. Lucille exhaled slowly, then stood. She moved with grace, with quiet power. As she stepped into the aisle, the first-class passengers avoided her gaze. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others, like Richard Coleman, remained seated, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The doors opened. And then, chaos. Cameras flashed. Microphones thrust forward. Reporters called out, their voices overlapping. "Mrs. O'Neal, how do you feel about what happened? Do you plan to take legal action? Was this racial discrimination?" Lucille didn't answer. She didn't need to. The world had already seen everything. And then, Shaquille O'Neal stepped forward. He stood just beyond the gate, arms crossed, towering over everyone. He wasn't just a basketball legend at that moment. He was a son. A son whose mother had been humiliated, disrespected, reduced to an inconvenience. His face was unreadable, but the fire in his eyes said everything. The airline's executives stood a few feet away, shifting uncomfortably. The CEO, Mark Ellison, wiped sweat from his brow, his suit suddenly too tight. He had been forced to fly in from New York the moment the backlash exploded. Shaq took a deep breath and stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His words carried weight, the kind that settled deep into people's chests. What happened on that flight wasn't just wrong. It was unacceptable. The crowd hushed. My mother was treated with disrespect, not because she did anything wrong, not because she caused a problem, but because some people still believe dignity is something you have to earn instead of something you deserve. Mark Ellison cleared his throat, stepping forward as if to speak, but Shaq held up a hand. "You're not going to give some PR apology," he said, his voice like iron. "You're not going to say, 'We're reviewing our policies,' and move on like this never happened. Not this time." Lucille placed a hand on her son's arm, grounding him. Her strength had always been his anchor. "You disrespected my mother," Shaq continued, looking directly at the flight crew standing stiffly nearby. "Not because of who she is, but because of what she looks like. And the only reason you care now is because of who I am." Silence. The weight of his words settled over the terminal. Mark Ellison finally found his voice. He cleared his throat again, stepping forward. Mr. O'Neal, Mrs. O'Neal, we deeply regret this incident. It does not reflect the values of our airline. We are taking this matter very seriously. Lucille tilted her head, looking at him calmly. Are you? She asked. Ellison faltered. He shifted, glancing at the cameras. We are implementing immediate diversity training for all staff. We will be reviewing our policies to ensure. Shaq shook his head. Nah, that's not enough. Ellison blinked. Shaq stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. Training is the bare minimum. I want real change. I want to see hiring practices shift. I want accountability. I want policies that protect passengers from this kind of treatment. I want to see people like Charlotte West held responsible for their choices. Charlotte flinched at the mention of her name. Her eyes flicked downward. I want a public commitment from you. Shaq continued, unwavering. Not just for my mother. For every person who's ever been treated like they don't belong. Ellison hesitated. He had no way out. The world was watching. We will do whatever it takes to make this right, he said finally. Shaq nodded, but his expression remained unreadable. He turned to his mother. What do you want, Ma? Lucille, ever poised, met Ellison's gaze. I want to see change, not just hear about it. A single sentence, yet it carried the weight of history. Ellison swallowed hard and nodded. You have my word. As the press conference wrapped up, the internet continued to explode. Headlines spread like wildfire. Shaq stands up for his mother in airline controversy. #, respect Lucille O'Neal, sparks nationwide conversation on bias in air travel. Airline promises reforms after public backlash. Inside the terminal, Charlotte West remained standing off to the side, her arms wrapped around herself. She had spent years believing she was just following the rules, that she was doing her job. But now, she saw the truth, clear and undeniable. She had humiliated a woman who deserved respect. Not because of her son, not because of her fame, but because she was a human being. Lucille caught her eye for the briefest moment. Charlotte opened her mouth, then closed it. No apology would be enough. She turned and walked away. Shaq exhaled, running a hand over his face. His mother touched his arm again. You handled that well, son. He looked down at her, his expression softening. I learned from the best. Lucille smiled, not victorious, not triumphant, just resolute. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about her. It was about making sure no one else had to endure what she did. As they walked toward the exit, the cameras continued to flash, but Lucille O'Neal didn't look back. She had already won. Injustice thrives in silence, but not anymore. Lucille's story is just one of many, a reminder that dignity should never be up for debate. Share this story. Speak up when you see discrimination, and hold those in power accountable. Change doesn't happen on its own. It starts with us. Follow, engage, and be part of the movement to demand respect for everyone, no matter where they sit. Will you stand with us?